Hi, everybody. Hello. Happy Thursday. Happy Parsha Day. Woo! Exciting. All right, let's just say a blessing just to get ourselves into that spiritual space. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank God for allowing us to be deep in Torah. Okay, so I want to today think a little bit about what I think is an important way, of an important lens of analysis to bring to our study of the Torah, and that is to use the modern term, modernish term, archetypes. Thinking about archetypes, right? Like this is Jung's language, archetypes. Some people are familiar with this. We actually have come to use it commonly now. It's falling into common usage in the language, but as Jung used it as a kind of a term, a psychological term, it is a kind of a character that represents more than just like that person's identity. That a character in a story has a kind of is boy, I'm explaining it badly. Does someone want to do a better job than me? Anyone feel really familiar with this stuff?
Familiar enough in Bible study that an archetype is a character that forms a pattern throughout world history. For instance, the young boy going off into the world to seek his fame and fortune, who conquers lions and miracles and and ends up becoming a great king, a leader, a sage, or something.
Great, thank you, Richard. You indeed did a much clearer, crisper job than I at providing an example of the way that in ancient myth, the stories are meant to be more than just a story about a character, but a story that represents a kind of universal character, a universal story, a theme that has meaning, and that Jung does some work and Joseph Campbell does further in identifying those archetypes across mythologies, so that you start to get a sense that what we're talking about is a deep character, a certain type that's in the world, a type of story, a type of person, a kind of a way of being in the world. Okay, so with that concept in mind, when we think about the characters in the Torah, I think the Torah itself is asking us to read them not just as characters, but as archetypes. In other words, what does Abraham represent in the world? What does Rebecca represent in the world? What does Jacob represent in the world? That is at least the way the tradition has come to read these characters. And this is a tradition that really believes in the historical truth of these characters, but that's not important. Whether you believe in the historical that's actually, the point is to leave that aside and to think of them as expressing certain kinds of beings, certain kinds of personalities. Okay, so like Abraham, for example, is known for kindness. What does it mean to be a person who is defined by kindness in the world? The Kabbalists especially take these attributes up and really think of the characters almost not even as characters as much as they are forces and kind of ideas for us all to think about. So if I asked you, which character in the Torah do you most identify with? You might start to think, well, what do they express in the world? And is that me? Is that who's my spirit animal in the Torah? Who's my spirit character in the Torah, right? Okay, I say all of this. I think it is an important way to think about all of the characters in the Torah, but I today want to talk about one of my favorite minor characters in the Torah, and that is Bezalel, the constructor of the master builder of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, the desert temple. And Bezalel is a very, very cool character, and is certainly, it doesn't get a lot of airplay, but all the more so, what we do see is like sketches out a kind of an archetype for us. And it is certainly the, like if we were doing tarot cards, right? Because like there are many traditions that have kind of archetypical figures. We're doing tarot cards, right? Bezalel will be the builder, right? And that's something that's like his job in itself is a kind of an art. What does it mean to be a builder? And we'll be asking that question. But there's certain texture to it. There's certain way that the Torah describes who Bezalel is, and then in the tradition really deepens that for us to flesh out a character that really represents something important in the world. I hope by the end of our conversation today, we'll get to a deep sense of what does it mean to be a Bezalel. And let me just start by saying here, let me give you a source sheet. I'll put it in the chat here, a source sheet for you all. And I want to just start by talking about the name itself, because the name itself is already saying something. It's already cool. And this is part of how the Torah communicates a kind of an archetypal figure, is to give a significant name. So that Moses is Moshe, drawn from the water, and he's also the one who draws the people out of Egypt, so that his name expresses his essence. And in the kind of description of Bezalel, we're going to get some of his essence, but just in the name itself, if you know Hebrew, this name Bezalel, anyone? Or you can say it to yourself, but it's
shadow of God.
That's right, Yonatan. Bezalel, in the shadow of God. In the shadow of God. Bezalel means in the shadow of God. Okay, let me just write that down so that we all have it in front of us. In the shadow of God. That's quite a name. That's quite a name. And not only is it a name, but it's a little poem in itself. Bezalel. Like it's a very cool name. Okay, so Bezalel is, what does that mean? In the shadow of God. But that's one thing that's the first clue we have to who Bezalel is. Okay, now let's read the rest of that passage. This is Parshat Vayakhel, although Bezalel was introduced to us a little earlier on. I'm going to tell you about Bezalel, but now we really dig into him. Just for context, we're talking about the construction of the tabernacle, which we've already spent a whole Parsha on, because Moses told us all about the instructions for how to build the tabernacle. Moses already gave us all that. That's Parshat Truma. Now, one of the strange things about the book of Exodus is that 2 Parshot later, we get to Parshat Vayakhel, and Parshat Vayakhel actually details the making of the tabernacle. So it's basically the same information all over again. It's one of the most frustrating kind of, Parshat Truma is not that interesting. Parshat Vayakhel is the same thing. It's just the actualizing of the instructions. And Moses was the giver of the instructions, and Bezalel is the one who's going to actualize it, who's going to actually build. And that's basically the story. That's basically all you need to know. So now let's get into it, because I said it's kind of boring to read the actual construction, but there are some hints around the character of Bezalel, the description of Bezalel, that are actually quite intriguing, and we're gonna have to make sense of them, but we'll quickly see a kind of depth being suggested here in the description of Bezalel. So let's take a look at our first source once again. Okay, and Moses said to the Israelites, "See, the Eternal has singled out by name Bezalel," meaning in the shadow of God, "son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah." And now here's where things get interesting. "And has endowed him with a divine spirit, with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in every kind of craft." Okay, over here in the Hebrew, "Vayamale oto ruach Elohim," a spirit of God, "bichokhma, bitvuna, uvedat." Okay, that's wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And I'm just going to highlight these 3 words here. I'm just going to make quick reference to it, and then back away, and we can just sort of try to make sense of the text as it is. But you should know that these three qualities become an entire, I guess the word is epistemology, a kind of Jewish philosophy of knowledge. How do you know things? Through three levels of knowledge: chokhmah, bina, and da'at, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And if you listen to the first letters of chokhmah, bina, and da'at, you get Chabad. And actually, Chabad, the Hasidic movement, the founder is one of the great expositors of this theory of knowledge, that there are three kinds of, okay, but we're not going to go too deep in that today. I just want you to know that this is the first mention of what becomes a classic Jewish triad of knowledge, three different kinds of knowledge. We can talk a little bit more about what exactly they represent if we get to that. But just note that Betzalel has been endowed with a divine spirit and these three qualities that he can bring to all the work. And God has given him a mind that, a mind that can create designs in gold, silver, and copper, to cut stones for every setting and to carve wood, to work in every kind of designer's craft. The words in Hebrew are melechet machshevet, which is like thoughtful mind, needing thoughts, kind of work that is mental and needs a certain kind of thinking, okay? And to give instructions. He and Aholiav, the son of Achisamach of the tribe of Dan. Aholiav doesn't get a lot of airplay because he's just the assistant, but he was there too. And as we think about the archetype of Betzalel, we can just pay attention to the fact that there are others like him. There is a kind of a Robin to his Batman. Okay, so they've been endowed with the wisdom of the heart to do any work of the carver, designer, the embroiderer in purple, blue, crimson yards, and in fine linen, and of the weaver as workers in all crafts and as makers of design. Now, the wisdom of the heart here, like, you know, the translation in Safari originally is something like with, you know, knowledge of every kind of craft. Like they can't, because it's a little awkward to translate this as it is, chokhmat lev, wisdom of the heart. But I want us to have access to that language because we spoke of wisdom above, but it's heart wisdom. And remember that in ancient Hebrew, the lev is both the mind and the heart, okay? So now you have a lot of the pieces. Betzalel is in the shadow of God. He's filled with the Spirit of God. He has these three qualities of knowledge, which we're going to translate wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And he and his kind, his guildsmen, have chokhmat lev, wisdom of the consciousness of the heart. Okay, in order to do all this kind of work, in order to build the Mishkan. So who is Betzalel? And now you tell me. Now we're just going to try and speak out. What is this? Who is this archetype? What is Betzalel? What's this type of person? What are we learning about this Betzalel? Okay, so let's see what impressions we're getting from the character of the builder. Noah.
Well, first thing, just taking from his name, in the shadow of God, his father has been being discussed in the chat. It's the light of God is my light, and so on, but I'm taking it to mean that Betzalel's able to nullify himself so much that he can receive all this divine wisdom and all that stuff to be able to fashion the Mishkan. So he's one of those that can put himself back, but still be there to do the tasks.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I just I don't usually look at the chat, but I just looked at it because you referenced it there, and that I think it's Ariel suggests that's I totally missed that. I guess I've seen it before, but I forgot that it's Betzalel ben Uri, the shadow of God, son of my light, Uri. And that's very good. That's very good. Yeah. And Noah's doing wonderful texturing here of imagining that light then is God, and he's filled with the Spirit of God. And this is the guy who somehow brings mediates the light and creates a kind of a representation of something from the light down on the ground. Okay. Are we not in archetypal land? I mean, this is a symbolic, even naming of a character. Okay. Yes, my mother. Right. So yeah. So my mother asked the question, who is all of this work for? Like, for whom are we making the tabernacle? And it's actually a good question. Who is the work for? Why are we building it for? I mean, I guess there are two choices, right? God or us? It's a deep question, actually, because if Bezalel is someone who's doing the work on the ground, then is he making something for us? Or is this for God? Is this to match God's vision, right? Where is, and Noah was suggesting this also, there's a kind of a middle space. He's between God and us. Now, of course, Moses is also in that middle space. So immediately, when we think about Bezalel, we also have to think there's God, there's God, there's us. Moses is in there and Bezalel is in there. What's their relationship? And that's one of the ways we're going to think about this today. And who are they most in touch with, God or with us? Okay, I see a lot of hands all of a sudden, which is great. Ariel, I'm going to give you, I think you spoke out this Ben Uri thing, so I'm going to give you the chance to jump in here.
Oh, thanks. I'm advantaged and my brother's name is Uri. So, but I'll say something personal about it too, which is, my grandparents came from Eastern Europe, and I never understood how Eastern Europe functioned until I observed them. My grandfather wanted a house, he built a house. My grandmother would want ravioli, she would roll dough and make it with her hands. And, they wanted a boat, they built a boat. It's this kind of knowledge that's very practical, this every design. I used to call him Saba who could fix glass. Like this kind of knowledge, which I think for most of us in LA modern is lost. It's not book knowledge, although it includes book knowledge. It's this ability to create, which in many respects is godlike in and of itself.
Yeah, love everything you said, and especially that twist at the end, right? God created. That's the idea. God made a world to hold us. And now we are making a world to hold God. Right? So so all of this stuff which seems like, it's like street smarts, practical, like handy knowledge. And it's like something like a little like, but it's not book knowledge, but actually that's creation. Right? So Bezalel is a creator. Okay. Hannah Jensen.
Yeah, I'm thinking through something that may not make any sense, so let me know if it doesn't. But last night in biblical poetry class, we looked at some Psalms, and some of you were there, some of you were not. But regardless, they're in one of the Psalms, in Psalm 121, one of the things that it mentions is that God is your shadow. Hashem tzilcha, like that's part of the way that it's understood. And so I'm just thinking today, because we talked about that last night, about the idea of God as our shadow, and what does it mean then for Bezalel to be the stand-in for that? And that in some ways you spoke of this gap. There's God and there's us and there's Moshe and there's Bezalel or whoever in between. But maybe what's happening is Bezalel actually fully closes that gap, because God is our shadow. And now we have an actual stand-in for that. That's tangible, that's attainable for us. And so it's the ultimate form of connection between us and this goal of God being our shadow. And also, of course it is, because we're building a space for God. So we're building this tabernacle, and we have to have this stand-in, because how else do we understand how to get there? And so he serves as the person to represent the closing of that space for us.
Right. That's beautifully put. And I hear in that description something, there's an implication there about Moses, right? Like Moses didn't bring it all the way down, maybe. Like there's something, Moses is after all the conduit, but there's something about Moses that's like maybe a little too far up there. And someone needs to like then take it from Moses. Because after all, we've already got Aaron also. Moses, and then Aaron speaks from, because we're talking about a message from God. So how does it get all the way down? And maybe Betzalel, as Hannah says, closes the gap. I love that. Let me see here. Did I see a hand from Jen Snow? No, not relevant anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, it's very similar in that if we're doing it for God, or if they were doing it for the God, they're doing it for themselves. And if they're doing it for themselves, they're doing it for God. Like,
yeah,
what a lot of people are saying, I think.
Yeah. Okay, good. I mean, that's what this is. There's some kind of mediation that we're kind of circling around that needs to take place between the divine and the human. And Betzalel being a shadow, if light starts somewhere and then like creates a shadow on the ground, we're thinking about that movement, right? So the question of who all this is for and who is in communication, that's at the heart of this. All right, let's take Payam.
I think it's important to be more nuanced about what Betzalel is. He's a craftsman. And there's a fundamental difference between an artisan, an artist, a craftsman, and a builder. So an artist takes impractical or theoretical things, but art isn't really practical. And a builder just follows blueprints. But a craftsman is, you would say, it's practical art. And so when they're talking about the three things that he has, that's what a craftsman is. So it's both divine and from the ground, because he still puts his own input into it, but it isn't just some lofty thing that's like theoretical as art more is, but more practical as a craftsperson would create.
Yeah, wonderful. That is good language, and the difference between arts and crafts actually is debated now very hotly in art schools. But I think it's a helpful distinction for us. There's something about something you can touch and use here that is clearly like central to the work that Betzalel is doing. But now I think it's also, Payam takes us into territory that allows us to speak out a little bit the difference between those three layers of knowledge. And I'm gonna do a very shorthand version, but this is the way that that these traits come to be described, at least in Chabad literature, right? And I've thought about it a lot, which is that wisdom, chokhmah, is just like apprehension, like the ability to perceive at all, undifferentiated perception, just being aware, right? Certain kind of consciousness. And they speak of these in other traditions, the yogic traditions, certain kind of consciousness of just being present and observing. That's wisdom, undifferentiated awareness. Bina, or tvuna here, two forms of it, understanding has come to be understood, to use the word twice, with a kind of play on the language of bina being related to bain, the difference between this and this. So bina is kind of like parsing things out, analytical thinking. The first distinguishing, right? To move from like undifferentiated awareness to separating things out. And there's a lot of categories and binaries and analytical thinking in bina. And then da'at, which knowledge, is the kind of knowledge that Payam was talking about and that Ariel was talking about. That kind of like I took wisdom and put it into some kind of analytical framework. How can I apply that in the world? Hands-on, how do I make something with that? Okay? So Betzalel has all of those things. And we were just talking about Moses. What do you think Moses has? Because Moses is known for his wisdom, chokhmah, right? So Okay. Let's take another comment or two, and then I want to take us further into the commentaries where things get really, really interesting. Julia Berg.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, in terms of the question of who is this Mishkan for, the extent to which it's for the people, because it's this thing that they don't always get to fully participate in. They can bring their offerings and everything, but this is their visual representation of what God looks like. And I think it's particularly interesting coming off the heels of the episode of the golden calf and how they took it upon themselves to create this thing that was going to be their God, but they didn't do it right. And now here's the way that they can do it exactly right and with the right intention.
That's a great reference point that Julia has given us. This idea that there's some kind of narrative relationship between the building of the golden calf in last week's Parsha, this kind of great idolatrous spectacle, and the building of the Mishkan. And there's some debate, because it comes both before and after. Was the building of the Mishkan a response to the golden chronologically, a response to the golden calf? Like, oh, you can't handle, you need something physical, but this is a better version of it, right? And if that's so, then we can sort of imagine that Bezalel knows something like important about what it takes to do this dangerous thing of having a physical relationship to a tangible relationship to God, which very quickly becomes idolatry. But maybe you can construct a space that you feel the presence of God in, rather than thinking that the thing you construct is a God. And that's like a very hard distinction to make. I mean, at what point do we start worshiping the Mishkan itself? All right, so Bezalel kind of like, there's an implication here that Julia is suggesting that Bezalel knows not just how to build it, but how to do it in a way that is right, that is religiously right, that like there's something deep about what it means to translate a religious vision, a message of prophecy down into the ground. Okay. All right, let me take one more comment. Alexandra?
I was a little late, so I don't know if this was mentioned. I heard you mention Jungian archetypes, and I find it fascinating that his name is the shadow of God, because Jungian shadow work is also a big thing. And when artists go into that shadow space, not to dwell there, but for the purpose of excavating and seeking the light and clearing it, it opens up to inspiration and to all kinds of like new crafts, new arts, like the more one clears their shadow work, the more one has access to inspiration, and all inspiration, in my opinion, comes from God. And so I love that Bezalel is, to me, an archetype for that, for the truth seeker, for the person who's so intent on seeking wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, has the courage to go deep and dig dark in order to excavate it, to transform it into the light. And because he did that, this is how I'm seeing him, he was endowed with all of these abilities because he became so clear that he was able to receive all this inspiration from God. And so I love that whoever said that his father's name is about light. And I just think I've never thought of him or understood him in this way, but I think it's really gorgeous and a beautiful model for artists and craftspeople, but also all people because all inspiration in any field does come from God.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's a really beautiful way to think about going into the shadow side, going into the darkness. And it's an important reflection on the concept of a shadow. We'll incorporate also Hannah's comments earlier that there's something about God can be our shadow, as in protector, like covering us. But God is also the light. Okay, so God is the light and the dark. And the shadow itself can be a good thing, a protection, a shade, or Salmavet, the shadow of death, the darkness that hovers over us. All right. So there's like a lot to crack open and kind of play with here in the the archetype that's emerging of Betzalel. But let's I want to do some more. We had one quick description. I want to do some more work in kind of getting to the depth of the character Betzalel, the archetype Betzalel. And to do that, I want to follow some of our commentators as they do the same work that we're doing, and I think will help us get to a fuller appreciation. So first, we're going to look at Rashi, our most famous commentator, medieval commentator, and then we're going to look at someone responding immediately to Rashi. But let's take a look at what Rashi says. And in order to see what Rashi says, actually Rashi, it's not on, and Rashi's not commenting on what we've just read, but something much later. Look, we're in chapter 35. They're at the end of then Betzalel gets to work and starts building. And at the end of the description, Rashi is going to jump in on this line, and the reason that he's going to is because he sees an extra word. Okay, so look for an extra word in verse 22. So these are the records of the Mishkan of the Pact. I keep translating it as Mishkan here because I just heard Rabbi Brau say the other day, why do we translate it as tabernacle? It's like a word that no one knows. Why not just translate it Mishkan? And she's so right about that. So I'm going to be translating it as Mishkan from now on. She said she compared it to phylacteries for tefillin. It's like, what? Anyway, so these are the records of the tabernacle, the Mishkan of the Pact, which were drawn up at Moses' order, the work of the Levites under the direction of Itamar, son of Aaron the priest. Okay, there's an extra word in this line. Now, Betzalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, had made all that the Eternal had commanded Moses. At his side was Aholiab, son of Achisamach of the tribe of Dan, carver and designer and embroiderer in blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine linen. Okay, so can anyone tell me what's the extra word in verse 22?
All.
All. Okay, Yonatan's very good with the buzzer. Bing. All. That's right. I just saw a friend of ours, the Karite, Ariel Davis, was on Wheel of Fortune last night, and it was really exciting to see her on Wheel of Fortune. So it's like there's some skill. Speaking of knowledge of practical things, so how do you hit the buzzer? But that's right, the word all. Okay, it could have said that Betzalel made what the Eternal had commanded Moses, but it says he made all. And you don't need to say that, kol asher. And so Rashi asked, this is a classic kind of rabbinic move. And so Rashi asks the question, what's the all there for? Right? Well, why do we have all there, assuming that every word in the Torah is meaningful? And here's what Rashi says. This is a great little narrative that Rashi gives us. Okay, so it doesn't just say that the Eternal had commanded Moses. Oh, it doesn't just say that had made what the Eternal had commanded Moses. I should probably translate it just so we understand. It doesn't say what the Eternal had commanded Moses, but all that the Eternal had commanded Moses. That is, even things that his master Moses did not tell him. Betzalel's mind accorded with what had been said to Moses on Sinai. This is a wild thing to say. All means he knew everything, even the stuff Moses wasn't telling him. I don't even know what language to use, but the language in Hebrew is hiskima da'ato, and there's that dat. There's that word again, knowledge, his consciousness, his practical knowledge. Hiskima agreed with, or his mind accorded to, what was said to Moses at Sinai. Okay, so how is that? What does that even mean? I owe Moses, you didn't tell me, but I know there's another piece of it. Okay, and here's some of the narrative that we're going to get in imagining this happening. For Moses commanded Betzalel to make the vessels first, and afterwards the Mishkan itself. But Betzalel said to him, the common practice of the world is first to make a house, and afterwards to put furnishings in it. Now, this might be confusing. What are they talking about here? But it's actually what Rashi's bringing us here is actually an analysis of the text itself. Because Moses, I told you, lays out all the instructions for the Mishkan, Let me stop sharing for a second. Moses lays out all the instructions, but Bezalel then implements them. So it seems like repetition is more, but actually they do it in different orders. Okay, and this is where Parshanut, like the study of the commentaries, is really like studying an analysis of the text itself. And let me just show you how that works. Okay, just so we see it in the flesh, so to speak. Okay, when we first heard about the sanctuary back in Exodus chapter 25, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. This is God talking. Exactly as I show you, the pattern of the Mishkan and the pattern of all its furnishings, kelav, vessels, furnishings, so you shall make it. What's the very next line? They shall make an ark. Va'asu aron, they make an ark. What's in the ark? The tablets. Okay, that's the first thing that Moses talks about. And then he goes on to say all the other things. And finally, the building of the Mishkan itself. But when we look at Bezalel's work, this one's a little harder to catch, but now we're back in our Parsha, chapter 36, and Moses then called Bezalel and Aholiab and every wise-hearted person whom the Eternal had endowed with wisdom, to everyone who excelled in ability to undertake the task and carry it out. Now there's a long description of them getting all the stuff. And then at the end, then all the wise-hearted people among those engaged in the work made the Mishkan. And then it goes on to describe how they build the building. Okay. And then they build the stuff and they put the stuff in the building. Okay. Now we're going to go back to our Rashi here. So Moses commanded Bezalel to make the vessels first, make the holy ark first, and then make a mishkan to put it in. But Bezalel said to him, that doesn't make sense. The common practice of the world, minhag olam, is to first make a house, and then afterwards to put a furniture. You don't build a chair and then build a house for it to go in. You build a chair to put in a house. Okay. So Moses said to him, and this is just so colorful and wonderful. Moses said to him, that is exactly the way I heard it from the mouth of the Holy Blessed One. That you're right. That is what that was what God said. You were truly in God's shadow, Bezalel. You were truly Bezalel. For indeed, that is what the Holy One commanded me to do, to make the Mishkan first, and afterwards to make all the things that go in it. Okay, okay, this is kind of funny. Like Bezalel, first of all, it's not funny. First of all, it's a wild and bold thing to say. He intuited that which was heard on Mount Sinai. He just knew it, right? Now, what is the nature of this? Let's just start to talk about this. What's the nature of this? Now, what did Bezalel get that Moses didn't get? Right? And there's something that Bezalel just said. What's the nature of this? Is he a prophet also? Or how do we understand this interchange? Lila?
It's funny. I think it is funny. And this conversation, it's sort of like a Hillel Shammai debate. Like, it's like this, it could be, and like, it kind of doesn't matter on the surface of things. It's just like what an opinion versus an opinion. But, Moses, when Moses on the mountain, he's given like 10 million sets of instructions. I mean, how on earth, plus he's like in conversation with God and radiant, like how on earth is he focusing on any of these nitty gritty details? And I don't think he is, and I think Bezalel is this vessel for some new model. Like until this point, being in relationship with God means things are kind of done for you. Like it's all wonder and awe and magic. Like here's man, you're hungry, here's man. Like here's, hit the rock, water comes out. And now it's like actually being part of this covenant means like it's a ton of like earthly work. Like it's all this procedural stuff you're going to be builders, and that like, yeah, you have your work cut out for you. And the Mishkan, like, it's just a representation of that and everything that's to come, like really what the Jewish religion is, and this law-based kind of thing. And like what Bezalel does is make the connection. It's an embodied, as the connection between like that divine relationship and the on the ground work and how the two are actually connected.
Yeah, that is also so beautifully put. And yeah, I mean, there's this work that Bezalel's doing is the work that we have to do, right? We have to build, we have to do in the world. And this, and Lila suggests very profoundly and rightly that that's in some ways the whole like effort of the Torah is to try and get something from on high. And how do you get it down to people? And remember that Moses is not a good delegator, right? That's not his, right? Like Jethro had to come along and tell him, listen, you need people to do. Moses's vision is like, here's what God said. Here's what God said. It's all true. Illuminating light, blinding light. Moses can, it does. There's a way in which all Moses gets is just like, just do what God says, right? Like, and he doesn't know how to actually implement it in the world, right? And that's a question of making things like actually like building a. It's also a question about how do you live spirituality in the world? How do we function with God consciousness in the world? If I'm just zoned out all the time, God's everywhere, right? Then, okay, but doesn't seem to be the mission of this religion. How do we live this out in the world, right? Take a look, by the way, Deuteronomy chapter 1 at the way Moses describes the people that he then appoints after Jethro gives him that charge. Moses describes them as people with chokhmah, bina, v'dat. So just there's a connection there also. Okay, I wanted to make sure to get us through this full kind of description of the character of Bezalel that emerges throughout the generations. But we're still on this Rashi. We're imagining this conversation between Moses and Bezalel, and I want to throw now into that, like, you know, what is I still have this question. What is it that Bezalel got? What is the nature of his knowledge, which we're talking through? But also, does this make any sense? There's a problem in what Rashi is giving us, which is like what Lila described made sense. I mean, Moses is up there; he doesn't know fully how to translate it, but that's not the Moses that we hear in this narrative. The Moses we hear in this narrative is like, oops. That's right. That's what God said. I got it wrong. It's like, what is that? Like, what do we do with that? Moses just sort of, oh, you're right. That Parsha Truma, that's out of order. My bad. Right? Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Allison Goldman.
Cool. Well, I had one comment from before, which was the question of, you know, like, are we doing this for God or is God doing it for us? And just the one thing that I wanted to share is it reminds me of like when you really love someone, if you like make something for them, you know, it's kind of like if you love someone, you like make them dinner. Are you doing it for you or are you doing it for them? Maybe you're doing it for both of you, like you're doing it for the relationship. And maybe there's something in there for us and Hashem and the building of the Mishkan. Like, we do it because we love Hashem and Hashem wants to receive it because Hashem loves us.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet, like, that's, I mean, it's so, there's something so straightforward, something so simple about that. We just want to be in a relationship with God. And yet it's so complicated. What complicated. What does it mean to be in relationship with God? So somebody's got to like give us a path. Somebody's got to figure this out for us.
Right.
And I, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna then connect it to Bezalel and how we were talking about like who is he? What is this? Like the idea that he's a craftsman, a very practical person. I think that's really interesting. But what jumped out at me when I read this Parsha like, before class, without you guiding us, was it really jumped out at me how Hashem seemed to identify different people in the community and endow them with specific gifts and say like, you as a community are going to need all of these different talents. And what I thought was really like kind of beautiful about it, you know, like we kind of read ourselves into Torah, but this idea that like each of us has these unique gifts and that the collective like needs each of us because of the unique gifts that different members of the community have been blessed with. And so if that hadn't happened, if Moses just could tell Bezalel exactly how to do it, like he wouldn't be needed. And I think there's a teaching that like we're needed.
Oh, love it, love it. You're doing my work for me, right? I don't have to do any rabbi work now. You did it. That's right. I mean, I think that's at the heart of this. Right. Remember that that the Mishkan is made from the contributions of all. We saw some of that language, right? That everybody has to contribute. So everybody has something to contribute to the project of experiencing a relationship with God. And for some people, some people are going to be doing the meditation. I just had an insight. God is one, right? And some people are going to be like schlepping things around, moving chairs. And that's holy work. That's holy work. And if we didn't have someone moving chairs, then you'd never hear about the insight from the meditator. Right? So it's all part of the project. And that's part of what we are starting to understand when we understand that Moses is different from Bezalel, is that we're all different. And we all have something. I mean, I know it sounds cheesy, but it's there in the text. Kol asher nadav libo. We all have something to give. Each of our hearts has something to contribute, right, to the project. Okay. All right, let's take a couple more comments and then I'll take you to the last piece here. Esra.
Yeah, connecting off of Allison, what you were saying, so beautiful. Also, when in relationship with divine and with each other, maybe in a divine way, I'm still thinking about that question of who is the Mishkan for, and also its purpose. And I'm thinking about, you know, you can be in a loving relationship with a partner, family, you know, day in, day out, but there's something about having like a separate space. And that space being like a nice space, a space that's uncluttered by like, you know, mess, or a space that's just, it looks different. It's, you know, at the risk of being cheesy or simplistic, it's kind of like, you know, but Salah's setting it up. He's like, you know, here's the rose petals and here's the candelabra and the tablecloth, and, you know, just setting up a nice space, or setting up the meditation room, or, you know, setting up the space where we can, the creating of the space can be holy and whatnot, but also like, it is also important. And this is where for me, like, I appreciate the embodied aspects of Judaism, where it's like, we're going to put a physical boundary in space and bound it by time, and you actually show up and then you're in that physical space. And it's not just the idea, you know, you can meditate all day long as you're walking down the street, but it's the praxis too of like entering a defined space.
Okay, that is all so excellently said. I so appreciate that, because it's a thread we've kind of heard a little bit about through this conversation, but it's important to do, as Esther does, give full voice to the physicality of Bezalel's role. To use the word you use, the embodied spirituality here. It's like, how do you take something and bring it into the world? And it's very, very easy in the realm of religion to think that nothing physical matters. It's just pure thought. It's pure spirit. It's pure, this whole world is meaningless, just like God, right? I like that. I dig that. I'm into that. But Moses was all that, right? Just like, yeah, just in the zone. So, but that's not the vision of this religion. Right? Like, but this is where Lila started us off. It's not, we have to like live this out and do this. And as Esra puts it, the religion then is a physical religion. It's how to live physically in an embodied way in this world. And what could be more physical than the building of a thing? Why do you need a building to experience God? Go out into nature. Forget about it. Go into your closet and just close your eyes. Yet we need space. We live in a world. God created a world. This whole thing's supposed to be physical. Okay. All right, I want to now, with these very kind of stark and beautiful, I think we've really gotten somewhere in imagining the role that Bezalel represents, the archetype that Bezalel represents. I want to now come to one of the great archetypal thinkers in Judaism, the Maharal of Prague. The Maharal was a 16th century a great philosopher in Prague, and I would call his philosophy. I'm a huge fan. I've been learning the Maharal since I was a yeshiva bacher, and I would call his philosophy essentialism. Essentialism, meaning searching for the essences of things, and in that sense, it's like Platonic, right? There's like the ideas, the essences of things, and there's something very beautiful. What is the essence of a builder? What is the essence of a world? What is the essence of light? What's the essence of darkness? So exactly the sort of symbolic thinking that we're doing. Now, I want to say, especially because it's so part of our cultural conversation, that essentialism can be dangerous, that reducing everything to its essence is like very kind of categorizing, binary kind of, this is what a man is, this is what a woman is. So we have to remember, these are conceptual tools. And actually, in this piece in the Maharal, he is going to give us his essentialism, but in some ways, he himself is dealing with the distinction between those concepts and how they actually live in the world. So let's take a listen here. And the Maharal is going to be it's what he does is he writes a commentary, not just his own commentary, but a commentary humbly following Rashi. So he looked at the Rashi that we just looked at that said Moses, at the end of which Moses says, oh my gosh, that's what God said to me. Oops, I made a mistake. And Maharal is wondering, how can Rashi say this? What does that even mean that Moses got it wrong? That's not the essence of Moses, is it? So take a look at what the Maharal, and the name of the Maharal's commentary on, I should just say, by the way, that you may know the Maharal from making the Golem, right? That's what he's most famous for. But what he really did was he created one of the most robust philosophical canons or oeuvres in Judaism. I don't know what the right word is there. Okay, so here the name of his commentary is the Gur Aryeh. Okay, so even things that his master Moses did not tell him, that's what Bezalel got. And the Maharal says, and if you ask, but wait, why didn't Moses just command him to build the Mishkan first? Why did Moses say it wrong? That in itself doesn't make any sense. So what he says is so beautiful and so profound, so helpful in thinking about archetypes and the way people think and the kinds of leaders that we have and the kind of people that we are. That's a lot, but I think he does that. We might say, what's the answer? Moses mentioned the vessels first, meaning the Aron, the ark, because in truth, the vessels are more important than the tabernacle itself. Because that's the tablets. That's like where God's message lies. And one should start with the essential thing. The essential thing, by the way, that's the name of our community, Ikar. Always start at Ikar. And then if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. One should start with the essential thing. However, when it comes to the actual construction, one should start with the Mishkan because the Mishkan holds the vessels. So Bezalel, who was appointed to do the act of construction, understood that he had to make the Mishkan first. But what about Moses? But Moses, who was appointed to do the teaching, he knew the whole scheme of the tabernacle. And for the purpose of teaching, he began with the vessels first. First thing he said was like, all right, we're going to put the Torah in here. We're going to put the tablets in here. We're going to build an ark to hold these tablets. But when it came to the notion of practical implementation of inyan ha'asiyah, he forgot what it was that goes first in reality. Nishkach himenu, he forgot until Bezalel came along and reminded him. And that is why, says the Maharal, he says, you are in the shadow of God. For Moses was especially attuned to learning, but not to doing. I just want to say that again. Moses was miyuchad l'talmud v'lo l'maseh. Moses is especially attuned to learning, but not to doing. Whereas Bezalel was a man of action. The general principle, what's the big idea here, is that Moses' knowledge came from study because that was his special purpose. And I don't know if this is the right phrase, but I love the phrase special purpose. Miyuchad, he was designated for that. And in study, one begins with the essential things. But Bezalel's special purpose was action. Miyuchad el hamase. And so the knowledge that came to him was how to make things. And that is how Bezalel knew how to make the Mishkan. Okay, so let's just start here in our remaining minutes. Why did Moses mention the ark first? Because the ark is the most important thing. And that's the way Moses thinks. He heard a bunch of stuff from God, and then he turned around and he's like, oh my gosh, let's think about the Torah. And we're going to build a building around the Torah. And God's word's going to rest right there in the middle, right? So first he starts talking about that and then builds outwards. He's not even worried about, well, I don't know, somebody will build it. But Bezalel sees things in the world, and he's a man of action. And he knows you can't just like start building an ark. Where are you going to put it? A holy ark, you just have it on the ground for a while you build the rest of it. He gets it. Okay. So in our last few minutes here, I want us to think about what the Maharal is telling us, which is that Moses was a teacher. Okay, I'm a teacher. I relate. Moses was a teacher, absent-minded professor, right? Like, loves the ideas, can't really apply them in the world. Moses is a teacher, right? Bezalel was a builder, a doer. Now, consider that. Do you know people in this world? Do you know did you see these archetypes of people who are visionaries, but like don't know how to apply? And then people who are appliers, builders, doers, right? It is a binary. Binaries help us think. So it's not like these are real down on the ground, but they're concepts, right? Because the Maharal also is like Moses. He's a teacher. He's thinking in concepts. So I want to just end by asking you, like, where do you see these archetypes, or how do you think of these archetypes, or how might you use these archetypes of the idea person and the action person, the teacher and the builder in the world? Okay. All right. I'm going to turn to some of the hands that are up. Jen Bailey-Guerra.
Yeah, I love that this kind of extends what I was already thinking, because one of the roles of the people who live practically in the world, concretely and humanly, is to question authority. It's to push back against the visionaries and tell them, no, you got it wrong. And that seems to me like on some level, it's sort of the beating heart of our tradition, because wrestling with God is what we're supposed to do. So this is really parallel to that for me.
Yeah, what a deep thing that's happening here. That Bezalel there's something almost heretical about it. Bezalel is saying, like, I don't think you understood the message from God right. And Moses is saying, you're right. Oh, you're right. I got confused. That's an incredible thing. And Jen turns it into a mandate. We're being told that we can be a little Bezalel here. Yeah, Marlene.
Yeah, I think that there's a danger here also in over stereotyping people, because I think sometimes when I think about, for example, whether your child is going to go to junior college and learn to be a plumber instead of a doctor, we devalue that. And so sometimes if we split these archetypes too much, we lose the fact that the people who are in practice can be spiritual and can be important the way Bezalel is. And so I think we have to check ourselves a little bit. And I lived in academia for 30 years, so I understand the ivory tower and the absent-minded professor quite well. And it's not easy to be that person, but sometimes you just shake that person and say, don't you even know how to mail a letter? Can't you even get this done? And so I think sometimes this division, even though it's an archetype, can be less helpful than more helpful.
Okay, thank you for that, Marlene. And you're picking up on a caveat that I issued before we looked at this, and I want to really, you've given us more language for us. I want to speak this out, because this is really important. This is kind of like a meta conversation here, which is that once we are thinking in archetypes, we do have to be careful, because, and this is meta because it's like archetypes don't like exist in reality. In reality, we have people. So it's helpful to think about the teachers and the builders, but it's reductionist to then reduce all people into one or the other. And by the way, this is part of the conversation we're having around masculinity and femininity as archetypes. And that binary is very helpful. It helps all of us think about, oh, there are certain essences that I contain parts of. It's a way of thinking of oneself. But a lot of what we're trying to figure out now is, well, but down here in reality, how well did just those two forms capture my being? And by the way, it might be 95%, but let's just be careful because these are concepts. And the concepts, once they translate into, that's the whole point of Betzalel, is that once you get down to reality, you have to know how it actually works in real human life. And it isn't just pure concepts. So all of that is very well said here. We are almost out of time. I could take quick thoughts from Yael and Matt. Quick.
Very quick. I just wanted to go with the last thing you said about not limiting. And so what I see is Moshe and Betzalel are actually part of the one. And Moshe is receiving the word, and Betzalel is using the word. He has this Gnostic understanding a priori. He gets it. He gets the olam. He didn't use the word eretz. He didn't say this is derech eretz. He said this is derech olam. Olam is much bigger than the earth. And so what he's doing is infusing, and I think this is very important to what he creates. The kavanah must be infused into all the things of the Mishkan. Otherwise, they're worthless. Beautiful. They're empty and nothing.
Beautiful. A certain kind. What is that person? What is that wisdom? What is that knowledge? Matt Silverstein.
For those of you who watched the trial of the Chicago 7, this is exactly the debate between Abby Hoffman and Tom Hayden, because Hoffman is a visionary and they're both revolutionaries. They're both changing the whole world, but Hoffman has a vision of we're going to do this stuff. And Hayden's like, okay, but we need to get together and organize, and these people will do this job and these people will do that job. And it's even in revolution, you have the two different places to come from.
This is really, thank you for that. Let's speak that out a little bit as a kind of a closing thought, because these archetypes are helpful and we do see them in the world, and we do see them a lot in Jewish tradition, where there's someone who's like the idea person, like the Arizal, and then there's someone who writes it all down, the master. There's someone who propagates the vision, the Baal Shem Tov, right? This happens a lot in Jewish mysticism, because the mystic is like just out there like Moses in the clouds. But there's someone who knows how to turn it into a movement, right? There's the Melissa Balaban and there's the Rabbi Sharon Brous, right? Like there are archetypes out there. We can identify them, okay? So we'll end on that. I'll just close with one sort of kind of teasing thought that I have here, which is, again, someone mentioned this earlier, which is that the Mishkan is our version of creating a little world, and God creates a world. Right. So we also are left thinking about, like, what is it that, like, how well is God understanding the project of creating a world? What is God's, like, now that we look back at the creation itself, what does it mean for God to try and relate to us? But also, what does it mean for God to build something tangible when God is intangible? Right. And those sort of big spiritual questions are hovering above our conversation also. Anyway, hope this has been interesting and useful to you all. Great learning with you all today. Love you.